I've been following Curt Doolittle's work for about 5 years. I was one of the earlier people on Facebook following his statuses and reading his website. I had private conversations with him as far back as 2014, and I did voice criticisms at that time. Now, there's a lot of positive substance in Curt's work, and to a certain degree, I owe him a debt. He has educated me in a number of ways. But I do have criticisms of his system, and they're not simply academic. If you're watching this and you're involved with Propertarianism, this, first and foremost, is a warning. People must be warned, because explicitly, the goal of Propertarianism, and you can go to Curt's website right now and look at the very long article he has outlining exactly this purpose. The goal is to conduct a revolution against the government. Now, maybe you're okay with that. Personally, I think that's a bad objective, it's stupid, and it will fail for a number of reasons. First of all, NATO. It's not a matter of just overthrowing your government. The rules exist such that Canadian troops, French troops, British troops will come here in the event of a revolution here. So you can't just overthrow your own government. There is a multinational coalition that exists to keep the peace. And as far as the fragility or purported fragility of our infrastructure, Curt knows a lot, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know, necessarily. And so he doesn't know what technologies the government has in the event of this sort of system's collapse. He doesn't know what's in reserve, unless he claims to have full clearance, full security clearance in the Pentagon, which, you know, if he has that, then there's a whole other kind of concern we should have about his project. So Curt can't guarantee that, and of course, no one can guarantee anything ultimately, but the way it looks to me is that you're going up against a system that knows all of these contingencies, understands the possibility of a right-wing populist revolt. They've planned against this for decades. You don't think they have contingencies? You think Curt knows about every last one of them? Because the kind of rhetoric I've seen from him has to do with men in pickup trucks, starting fires in high-rises. This is something he's said. Or, you know, taking out bridges or throwing nails on bridges or something of that nature. But these sorts of measures that are easy for us to contemplate. And he says that this small number of men will be sufficient for this purpose. And I just see, if this happens, what I predict is that everyone involved will die, and anyone in the right wing at all will be permanently suppressed after that. Charlottesville was a massive setback for the people who were involved in the alt-right at that time. And if Curt does what Curt says he's going to do and fails, then it'll be a setback of a whole different kind of order. So I've followed Curt from almost the beginning. I've had conversations with him. I've followed his rhetoric. I understand his system. I know what he wants. Now, in one of those conversations, back in whenever it was, 2014 or 15, Curt told me that he worked for the government, and he specified back then, but I don't remember exactly in what capacity or what department, but he said after that he contracted with the government. He wasn't a government employee, but whatever. His job for the government, in whatever capacity, was writing plans to destabilize other governments, which is the kind of thing the CIA does, like in Ukraine, where he stayed recently, and he triangulates between Connecticut, Ukraine, and London. He kind of smells like a federal asset, and he has been one in the past. And that's another point of concern here. If he's worked for the government in the past, writing plans to destabilize governments, and he's on Facebook talking about his plans to destabilize the current Western governments, obviously they know what he's doing, and they'll follow every single person who's in contact with him. If you're in contact with Curt Doolittle, you almost certainly now have intelligence agents looking at what you're doing online and perhaps elsewhere. Just use common sense. They know what he's doing. It's practically illegal. I don't know how he's still on Facebook saying this kind of stuff. But yeah, use common sense. And this is another reason I'm making this video. I've said in the past, I do admire Curt. He's obviously a genius, whether he's a Fed or not. He is a genius, and he says a lot of really interesting stuff that I like reading. And I, spoke with him on this channel about his epistemological framework. And I think that that has certain merits. I also think it has shortcomings. But yeah, I want to just clarify, I'm not associated with Propertarianism. I think it's interesting, but I am not on board with what they want to do. I think anyone who does that, now I understand why they would want to do that, because they feel like the situation is desperate. We need to do something. But if you fail, you're going to make it worse. You're going to seal our fate. Right? Understand that. And by far, the most likely scenario here is that you fail. So, get over dreams of revolution. It's not going to happen in this day and age. They have, like, cheetah robots and shit that can hunt you down, whether or not the military is willing to shoot on its own citizens. The technology that exists today, even the stuff we know about, is terrifying. The stuff we don't know about is probably just to the point where revolution isn't possible. Which is why I advocate building systems within this system, except that it's simply a part of the environment at this stage. Right? You don't try to, like, throw revolution if you live in like some Pacific island. You don't throw a revolution against typhoons and hurricanes because you can't. You can't do anything about it. You bunker down, you do what you can. But certain things are outside of your control. So I know not everyone will listen, but now I do want to get into my actual critiques of his system intellectually. And I have 6 points. One second. Okay, 6 points. First, with his epistemology, he has, so it's kind of hard because everything's involved here right from the start, but it's, if you're not familiar with Propertarianism, the idea is that you make telling lies publicly illegal, effectively. So if you're delivering some kind of public speech or publishing a book or something like that, you're contributing to the informational commons, and someone thinks that you're lying, even with a lie of omission, he says, then you can be sued and taken to court. And the judge will use Curt's epistemological criteria, which are like 7 steps or something like that, 7 tests of consistency, consistency of conceptual identity, logic, empirical consistency, different. I mean, if you watch my stream with him, you can get a good idea of exactly what that system is. But no matter how theoretically complete it may be, and you're not an expert, you can't really evaluate it, right? Like, there are other philosophers working on epistemology, other thinkers who disagree with Curt in certain ways. So, he kind of just asserts that this is the best kind of system. But anyway, even if it was theoretically complete, the odds are that a judge won't be able to apply it absolutely, because it's not so cut and dry, right? You don't always know which criteria apply in a given case and which don't. Or, I mean, take some postmodern text, like you're reading 1,000 Plateaus by Deleuze. The way that such a book is structured, it's not even clear that a judge would be able to understand what's being claimed in it. And that's kind of the point. Any technical field, the same problem arises where how do you know the judge will be able to even comprehend what's being said? You don't have this population of 160 IQ judges ready to go. You could train a bunch of judges and hope that they'll make all the right decisions, but humans are fallible. And more than likely, these judges will simply make rulings in the interest of the power structure. That's how systems of government typically work. But more fundamentally, there is a putting the cart before the horse. Courts call in experts in a field to give their advice on something that the judge doesn't understand for himself, or to talk to the jury about something that's not commonly understood if it has bearing on the case. In Curt's worldview here, the expert is evaluated by the judge. So any new knowledge, you can just sue it, right? You can sue someone, take them to court, because they're saying something in the social sciences or wherever that you think it's damaging the informational commons or otherwise violating someone's property rights, and property rights are expanded massively so that collectives can own property, intangibles can be property, norms and things like that. So it makes it much easier to then bring someone to court. So effectively you can shut down any new research, any public intellectual activity if the judges don't understand what you're saying or think that it's damaging to someone else's property. So what this would do, and they admit this, it will stifle public discourse, and they say that's a good thing. But here's, it's funny because Curt Doolittle likes Nassim Taleb, but Nassim Taleb, if he evaluated what Curt was saying here, would be able to pick up on the problem where even if you only filtered out the false claims, right, you effectively suppressed falsehoods only and not truth, it may be that the intellectual system as a whole, our collective epistemological method, which can't exactly be written down, which we don't fully comprehend, socially we go through information and process it through our institutions and our practices, and this has outputs all over the place, and we can't trace that system. So maybe that system needs false inputs. Maybe it needs error, because how we respond to error is part of our own training. And that may have to be in an organic, evolutionarily precedented kind of context. Maybe you can't just fabricate errors like the scholastics did in the medieval period, working on logic and testing things by intentionally having books of errors and correct things and then making your evaluations. Maybe you need more than that. Maybe you need this kind of organic context of people just saying what they think and being wrong, and then the whole dialectic taking place. So that's 2 points on epistemology. And then next is his kind of moral presumption, which in the end, his system, you have to buy it because you share his sentiments, and that's it, right? It's going to be imposed by force. They say this. They're not really trying to convince everyone. They're trying to convince a small minority of violent men to enforce this on everyone else. And he values, Curt himself values things over experiences. He says that subjective value is basically meaningless. Personal experience is meaningless. He downplays this and plays up objects, essentially. So, that's kind of in the background all over the place in his rhetoric. But it's not... And he also denies really the possibility of psychology. Or maybe he doesn't deny the possibility of it, but he says all existing psychology is basically pseudoscience. I kind of agree with some of that, but it's more gray than I think he portrays it. Same with philosophy. He wants to throw out all of philosophy, and he hasn't even demonstrated to me that he understands, like, the hard problem of consciousness. I looked at a thread that he was discussing this recently. I don't think Curt understands what the hard problem actually is. And he says he won't debate idealists. I don't think he really understands idealism. I'm not sure that he really understands what Kant was saying. And of course, he's going to gaslight you if you believe in a given philosophical tradition, or you use that kind of thinking. He's going to gaslight you and say that's illegitimate. Assert his own method, which basically is this kind of Anglo-empiricist tradition. He's saying it's the right one, but there's a moral presumption there where do you necessarily want a more technologically advanced society? Do you necessarily want a society that values material possessions? Maybe there's a more sustainable course of technological development if we also value some of those subjective feelings and some moral concerns that don't come from this same kind of empiricist metaphysical construct. He's a naturalist, which that involves metaphysical presuppositions. They just don't understand that because they deny the possibility of metaphysics. But naturalism, the system of cause and effect and energy, forces, all of the constructs that we use to describe the world, these necessarily involve metaphysical presuppositions. So this is, just a kind of bias, a bigotry in a certain sense that he has. And I've watched him for 5 years. I'm not stupid, right? I'm familiar with the history of philosophy. I'm familiar with a lot of science, not as much as Curt, right? Because he doesn't read all that other stuff. He reads hard science, he likes to say. He conceives of himself as being a scientist of the social domain, but he inculcates, or rather implicates, moral presuppositions and metaphysical presuppositions all over the place in his writing. And his writing style is very assertive. He's making assertions all over the place and not painstakingly demonstrating why he's right. He just makes a lot of claims and pushes authoritatively that he's always right. He does claim that he's always right. That's what cult leaders do. That's a tactic of cult leaders. If Curt is a Fed, he has studied how cults operate. And if you know how he operates on Facebook, it's very similar to the way a cult leader interacts with their following. He'll say things like, "I love you all." Of course Curt doesn't love you. He doesn't know you. But he'll say that he loves you because that's what marginalized people want to hear. And marginalized people are the kind of people who are going to do something stupid. So if he is a Fed, there's a good reason why he would want to act in the way that he is acting. His behavior is consistent with a Fed setting up a controlled opposition to ultimately conduct a false flag attack that will basically neutralize the possibility of any future right-wing revolt that perhaps has more of like an organic grassroots kind of base. So moral presumption is 2. The epistemological problems were 1. If you want to respond to what I'm saying, say what you're responding to. Say 1, 2, 3, so I know. Geostrategic scenario is number 3. If the government was upset, the propertarian order wouldn't come into being overnight. That's a massive amount of institutional development that has to happen, and it will take time. And furthermore, like, are you going to replace everyone in the bureaucracy and the military-industrial complex at once? There's not enough experts to fill all those positions. You're going to have to retain people. How do you know that they will have loyalty to the new regime? Are you going to convince all of them? It just doesn't make sense. That's the thing. Playing this out in your head if you have that ability. So he, suppose this works. The government is overthrown. The propertarian order is being built. What happens to the world, right? No more American hegemony. no more check against China, it's going to be a lot of instability. And we really don't know what would happen. People can make predictions. You know, I have my own ideas. I think China would start expanding in Southeast Asia, like they have historically. I think Russia would start expanding in Eastern Europe. And there would be a lot of wars. There would be a lot of refugee movement. There would be just a lot of instability. And who knows what would happen in North America. But yeah, it's a big question mark, and there are nukes out there, right? There are nuclear weapons, there are serious threats to the world. We could potentially kill ourselves. That's why the whole American hegemony is a good thing in a sense. The neoconservative argument of like suppressing nuclear proliferation and all of that, like it does make sense. We haven't had World War III yet. Yes, we've conducted wars, but they've been relatively minor compared to the violence of previous centuries. Now, that's three. I don't have to go into that too much more, but it's a big question mark, and it can't be given a definitive answer. Curt might say this is what would happen, but he doesn't know. Nobody knows the future. You don't know what would happen. And then Curt's overall approach, I commented on parts of this already. He's very based on assertion in his writing style. Look on his website. See how much is simply asserted. He's making claims, not backing them up, just claiming that they're true. And then he gives you a long reading list, basically saying like, oh, it's all in here. But no like systematic system of citations. Really, there's a lot of assertion and gaslighting anyone who disagrees with his assertions. And then he does overloading and loading and framing and rallying and shaming. He relies on these all the time, and that is, if you follow his rhetoric, what he says the leftists are guilty of. So there's a hypocrisy there, and it's not surprising if you agree with me about what Curt's ultimate intention may actually be. My opinion is he's probably a Fed, right? I'm willing to be proven wrong. The only way I don't see this working where he's a Fed or a fool, I mean, he could be a Fed working with a faction within the State Department, CIA, different intelligence operations, working within a faction there that really does care about Western civilization, is concerned about the future, and wants to organize something on a massive scale. If there are a lot of people within the government who support what he's doing, then the situation changes, right? But it would have to be a significant portion of the intelligence apparatus and the military. If that is the case, then mea culpa, me and Curt, you and me are good, but I don't see any evidence for that. And so I'm more concerned with the possible downside of Curt being a Fed. And then psychologically, a majority or significant proportion of the people who follow Curt are at least slightly autistic, and that's not negligible because the world that he envisions is a nice world for autistic people where everything is cut and dry and like, I don't know, you can't lie. He puts out this kind of rationalist, hyper-rationalist, Anglo-empirical kind of worldview that people actually don't like. Most people don't like this. Most people want something more than that. And he thinks that he can solve this. He can solve the problem of religion and give people something else. But everything he's done is public. If he got his Propertarian order, he would have constant revolutions within that. Because why would you tolerate living under a system where you're not allowed to express your opinions because the judges say that they're not empirically validated or they're whatever? And he goes well beyond just like the simple kind of falsehoods that I could accept banning. Like if you're citing statistics and you say like this study said this, but you're wrong, like you should be forced to take that down. Like news articles often do this, blatant false facts. That sort of thing, fine. Yeah, that should be banned from journalism. We should have laws to take that sort of thing down. But he doesn't stop there. He goes well beyond that and talks basically about you can't believe in God. You can't believe in anything supernatural. Can't believe in reincarnation. You can't even believe in some theories of modern physics because it doesn't conform with his kind of, Asperger's cut and dry, neat, organized world. Even the question of the origin of that world, what's its ultimate base? Where does it find its ground? He doesn't get into that, and I don't know if he can get into that because of the way his mind works. So yeah, he's autistic, and his followers are autistic, and he would create an autistic world that people wouldn't like. And, he says that people would grow wealthy. That's just a claim. Just a claim. Suppressing false claims, yeah. So that's, did I say 6? Actually, the 6th point I already covered in the first epistemological point. So those are my 5 critiques of the actual intellectual system. Argue me on this. Debate me on this. If you think I'm wrong, do you think I made no valid points and I'm completely wrong, debate me on it and show how, illiterate on this stuff that I am or how unreasonable I am. Debate me live on this channel or anywhere else. I will debate you on this. I doubt that people will take me up on it. Not many people. But yeah, there's a lot to lose here if people follow Curt in his attempted coup. And the system itself isn't even complete. And not that I think a complete system could even work. There's an organic evolutionary process going on, and that's why I'm a traditionalist. You go with what tradition is handed down because we don't necessarily understand what relies on what in a system. And so kind of cutting it all up and then putting it back together because you've analyzed it, that doesn't necessarily work. And I know Curt will say that he's just, extrapolating off of the Western tradition that we've received, the legal tradition and all that. And there are some genuine good things in his system. I'm not saying it's all bad. Like suppressing falsehood, expanding the conception of property. All of that is tenable. I just wish it wasn't attached to, let's all go get ourselves killed and make our political cause hopeless for future generations. So be careful if you're associated with this. Ask Curt about his involvement with the government and see, if anyone will debate me. I hope that they do, and I hope either I'm wrong or other people realize what's going on. Thank you for listening.